Do you remember me, cowboy? I am the Apache you saved. I have come back for you. The sun hung low in the desert sky, turning the sand and rocks into a burning orange. The wind moved softly, carrying with it the smell of dry earth and dust. The cowboy rode slowly along the narrow path, his horse's hooves kicking up tiny clouds of sand. Days. He had been traveling alone for days, and the loneliness had begun to settle in his chest like a heavy stone. He had seen many dangers in these lands, storms, wild animals, even men who would steal without hesitation, but he had never felt a danger that touched his heart like the one he was about to meet. He had taken this route many times before. It was a quiet trail, away from the towns and the people who often made life complicated. He preferred it that way. Out here, the only sounds were the wind, the creak of the saddle, and the soft breathing of his horse. It was a simple life, one built on work, honesty, and survival. Yet beneath that simplicity he carried memories he could not shake. Memories of people he had helped, enemies he had fought, and choices that had haunted him. That day, as he rounded a bend in the canyon, he saw something that made him freeze. A figure was lying on the sand, partially hidden behind a jagged rock. At first he thought it was a rock that had the shape of a person, but as he drew closer he realized the figure was real. A young boy, maybe 12 or 13, was there. Barely moving, his clothes were torn, and his skin was scraped and bruised. Blood had dried on his arms and face. The boy's chest rose and fell weakly, his breathing shallow and uneven. The cowboy felt a strange mixture of fear and responsibility. Out here, stopping to help someone could be dangerous. The desert was harsh, and people were not always kind. But he could not leave the boy there. Something inside him, an instinct, perhaps, or a simple human compassion, pushed him forward. He dismounted, his boots crunching in the sand, and approached slowly. "Hey, you okay?" he asked softly, careful not to frighten the boy further. The boy's eyes opened slightly, revealing dark, frightened eyes that stared at him with confusion and pain. He tried to speak but could not. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The cowboy knelt beside him, examining his injuries. Cuts, bruises, and a twisted ankle. Nothing that could not be treated, but enough to make survival in the open desert nearly impossible. He lifted the boy gently, careful not to hurt him more. The boy whimpered softly but did not resist. The cowboy carried him to a shaded area under a large rock formation. Here, the sun was less harsh, and the boy could rest for a moment. He pulled a small water bottle from his saddlebag and pressed it to the boy's lips. The boy drank slowly, coughing a few times, but finally managing to swallow. "Don't worry, you're safe now," the cowboy said quietly. He knew that words were not enough, but they were all he had. He worked carefully, cleaning the boy's wounds with water and a clean cloth he always carried. The boy winced in pain but did not scream. There was something strong in him, even in this state of suffering. Hours passed as the cowboy tended to the boy. He made a small splint for the twisted ankle, using pieces of wood and strips of cloth torn from his own shirt. The boy's breathing became steadier, and he began to look at the cowboy with something like trust. The cowboy did not ask many questions. He did not know the boy's name, where he came from, or why he had been left alone in the desert. All he knew was that this child needed help, and that was enough. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and purple, the cowboy realized he could not stay here forever. Toss. The desert was dangerous at night, with wild animals and the cold that could kill just as easily as the sun. He had to make a choice. Leaving the boy was impossible, but taking him along would be risky. Any traveler or group they encountered could ask questions, and he had no answers that would protect them both. He thought for a moment, then made a decision. He would carry the boy to the nearest settlement, where he could find safe shelter and food. It would be a long journey, but he was strong and familiar with the land. He lifted the boy carefully onto his horse, letting him lean against his chest. The boy's small arms wrapped around him instinctively. There was no need for words. They understood each other through actions. The ride was slow and difficult. The horse struggled through the uneven terrain, and the boy's injuries made it impossible for him to sit comfortably. The cowboy adjusted his grip frequently, whispering words of reassurance. He noticed the boy flinching at every sound, every shadow, and he realized how alone and scared the child must have felt before meeting him. A lump formed in his throat. He had faced danger before, but nothing compared to the helplessness he saw in those dark, frightened eyes. When night fell, they stopped near a small creek to rest. The cowboy built a small fire, using rocks and dry wood he had collected along the trail. The boy watched the flames flicker, eyes wide with both fear and wonder. The cowboy offered him food from his saddlebag, some bread and dried meat. The boy ate slowly, almost cautiously, as if he could not believe someone was giving him kindness without expecting anything in return. For a moment, they sat in silence. The stars appeared above, shining bright in the clear desert sky. The cowboy felt a strange peace, despite the long day and the danger still surrounding them. He thought about the choices he had made in his life, moments of courage, moments of fear, moments when he had ignored his own safety to help someone else. He had never regretted those choices. And now, looking at this boy, he knew he never would. "Do you know where your people are?" he asked gently. The boy shook his head. No sound came out, just a slight nod of his head and a look that said, "I am lost." The cowboy understood. Sometimes words were useless, and actions were stronger than any language. He promised himself that he would get the boy somewhere safe, even if it meant risking his own life. The next morning they continued their journey. The boy leaned more heavily on the cowboy now, trusting him in a way that made the cowboy's heart ache with both pride and sorrow.
Every step was careful, every path chosen to avoid unnecessary danger.
The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of sand and stone, but the cowboy did not waver. He had faced harsh lands before, but nothing felt as important as keeping this boy alive. Days passed. They traveled cautiously, hiding during the heat of the day and moving mostly in the early morning and late evening. The boy's injuries healed slowly, and with each passing day he grew stronger. He began to speak a little, asking small questions in a quiet, hesitant voice. The cowboy answered as best as he could, teaching him small lessons about survival, the stars, and the paths through the desert. A bond grew between them, unspoken but powerful, built on trust, care, and shared silence. Finally, they reached the edge of a small settlement. The cowboy guided the boy to a healer he trusted, someone who could treat injuries properly and provide safety. He could not stay long. His own life was in the open, vulnerable. But he knew this was the right place for the boy. As he handed the boy over, he felt a strange emptiness, a fear that this might be the last time they ever saw each other. The boy looked up at him, eyes shining with gratitude and trust. He wanted to say something, but the words would not come. Instead, he reached out and touched the cowboy's hand, a simple gesture of thanks. The cowboy squeezed his hand gently, a silent promise that he would never forget this moment. Then he turned and rode away, the sun rising behind him, casting long shadows across the desert. As he rode, the cowboy thought about that day and the boy he had saved. He knew their paths might never cross again, but he also knew that one act of kindness could ripple through a life in ways he could not imagine. And somewhere, far away, A young boy carried the memory of a cowboy who chose compassion over fear, a memory that would shape him for the rest of his life. Years passed since that day in the desert. The cowboy continued his quiet life, moving from place to place, tending to his small herd, and taking on work whenever he could. Life was simple, as it had always been, but there was a certain emptiness in it. He thought often of the boy he had saved, wondering if he had survived, if he had grown strong, or if life had been cruel to him. Most of all, he wondered if the boy remembered him, small frightened child, lying under the hot sun, trusting him with his life. The boy, too, never forgot the cowboy. After that day, he had been cared for by a kind healer in a nearby settlement. The healer treated his wounds, fed him, and gave him a place to rest. But the boy's heart remained restless. Desert, with its harsh sun and wide open spaces, had left a mark on him. It had taught him that life could be both cruel and beautiful, that danger could come from any corner, and that sometimes only a stranger's kindness could make all the difference. Bear.
He grew into a young man, strong and aware of the world's harsh realities.
His hair had grown long and dark, and his eyes, once full of fear, now carried wisdom and determination. Life had been difficult. He had faced prejudice, loss, and the endless struggle to find his place. He had learned to hunt, to survive, and to read the signs of the land. But he never forgot the cowboy who had saved him. That one act of bravery and compassion had become a guiding light, a reminder that not all people were cruel, that some could choose kindness even when it was dangerous. The young man's people had moved far from the settlement where he had been cared for. The constant movement and displacement were not easy, but they had taught him resilience. He had learned to navigate between worlds, the world of settlers and the world of his own people. Neither was simple, and neither was free from conflict. Still, he carried himself with pride, dignity, and a quiet strength that few could match. He never forgot the lesson the cowboy had taught him, that courage and kindness mattered more than fear. Meanwhile, the cowboy aged slowly, as life in the desert demanded. His hair turned slightly gray, and lines appeared on his face from years of sun, wind, and work. He had moments of quiet reflection when he wondered whether he had done enough in his life. He thought of people he had helped, moments he had stood by when others would have walked away. But the memory of the boy he had saved, was the one he could never shake. He wondered what had become of him. Had the boy found safety, happiness? Did he remember the cowboy at all? These questions often kept him awake at night. Despite the distance and years, fate began to weave their paths closer again, though neither could see it yet. The cowboy continued his life, unaware of how his small act of courage had shaped another life entirely. The young man, now fully grown, often found himself thinking about the man who had saved him from death in the desert. He did not know where the cowboy had gone or even if he was still alive, but he carried a quiet hope that one day their paths might cross again. The thought gave him courage, a reason to face the challenges of life with determination. As he traveled from place to place, the young man noticed things that reminded him of that day in the desert. A flicker of sunlight on a rock, the sound of wind across the sand, or a lone figure on horseback in the distance. Each small detail brought back memories of the cowboy. He would pause, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude, longing, and curiosity. Desk ground in. He had survived, he had grown, and he had learned much, but he had also never forgotten that single moment of human kindness that had changed his life forever. The years were not easy for him. He faced dangers from the land, from people who did not understand or accept him, and from the world's constant struggles. There were times when he felt anger, sadness, and frustration, but he carried with him a quiet strength, built on the memory of that one act of mercy. He knew that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Rhea.
He remembered how the cowboy had faced the unknown, risking his own safety to help a stranger. That memory became a part of who he was.
One day, the young man found himself near the edge of a wide desert. He paused to rest, sitting under a lone tree. The wind moved gently and the sunlight touched the sand in long, golden rays. He closed his eyes and remembered the desert so many years ago, the heat, the wind, the fear, and the man who had saved him. He remembered how the cowboy had carried him, how he had tended his wounds, and how he had shown him a kindness that seemed impossible in a world full of danger. That memory was as vivid as the day it had happened. In the same years, the cowboy continued to live quietly, yet he also felt restless. He rode through the desert, tending to his work, helping when he could, but always carrying a quiet longing.
He remembered the boy often, wondering if the world had been kind to him.
He wondered if the boy had grown into a man of courage and wisdom, or if life had been cruel and unkind. He had faced many hardships himself, but there was a part of him that remained unfinished, a story left untold. As the young man grew, he began to understand the world better. He learned that people were not all good or all bad, that life could be cruel and generous at the same time, and that every choice mattered. He thought often about the cowboy, realizing that the man's act of courage had not only saved his life but had shaped his understanding of humanity. He wanted to honor that gift, to live a life worthy of the chance he had been given. Every decision he made, every challenge he faced, carried the echo of that long-ago day in the desert. The young man traveled far, meeting people from many walks of life past. He learned their stories, shared in their struggles, and offered help whenever he could. He did not seek fame, wealth, or recognition.
Instead, he sought to live with integrity, compassion, and courage, the very qualities that had been shown to him by the cowboy. He grew into a man admired not only for his strength, but for his heart, a man who carried the lesson of mercy into every corner of his life.
Despite all this, there was still an emptiness inside him. He had never found the cowboy again. He did not know if he was still alive or even if he could recognize him. And yet, he felt that someday, somehow, fate might bring them together again. He often imagined that meeting, wondering what he would say, what the cowboy might remember, and whether they could share the story of what had been lost and what had been gained over the years. Meanwhile, the cowboy, unaware of the young man's survival and growth, began to notice signs that life was guiding him towards something he could not yet see.
Dawn!
A small trail, a distant figure on the horizon, or even the way the wind shifted in the desert seemed to hint at something. Though he could not know it, the young man he had saved was now growing into a man of courage and strength, shaped by the memory of his kindness. Their stories were moving closer together, as though the world itself was arranging the reunion that both of them could not yet imagine. The young man's thoughts often returned to that day, to the fear he had felt, the pain, and the sudden, unexpected kindness. Time in it, he realized this single act had changed the direction of his life. Without it, he might not have survived. Without it, he might not have learned to trust, to hope, or to face life with courage. That moment was a turning point, a quiet revolution in his soul, and it reminded him that one person's courage could ripple across time and space, touching lives in ways that could never be measured. As the young man prepared for another journey across the desert, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before.
He wanted to live a life that honored the cowboy's courage, a life of kindness, integrity.
And somewhere, in the vastness of the desert, the cowboy continued to live, unaware that the boy he had saved had survived, grown, and carried forward the legacy of his mercy. Their paths, shaped by fate and courage, were moving closer, though neither could see the other yet. The story of the cowboy and the boy, separated by time but bound by a single act of courage, continued silently. The desert, vast and unyielding, held their memories, their hopes, and their silent longings. And somewhere deep in the hearts of both men, there was a quiet understanding that one day, perhaps, they would meet again.
That meeting would not just be a reunion. It would be the continuation of a story that had begun long ago under the harsh sun and shifting sands of the desert. The young man looked at the horizon one evening, the sky painted with orange and pink.
Peace mixed with longing. He did not know where the cowboy was, but he believed that fate had not forgotten them. Somewhere the man who had saved him was out there, living his life, carrying his own memories and regrets. And the young man knew that when they finally met again, the story of that long-ago day would finally find its voice. The years had changed both men, though they did not know it yet. The cowboy had grown older, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with the sun and wind of the desert. His movements were slower, measured, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a man who had lived carefully and watched closely. He had faced many dangers in his life, yet none had left as deep a mark as the memory of the boy he had saved long ago. The thought of him sometimes came unbidden, waking him in the night or appearing in the quiet moments of the day. The young man, the boy he had saved, had also grown. He was strong now, tall and confident, with the calm of someone who had faced life's hardships and survived. His dark eyes carried a mixture of determination and memory, the kind that only comes from remembering a single act of kindness that changed everything. He had spent years learning to survive, to navigate the world of settlers and his own people, and to carry himself with pride. And yet there was always a part of him that yearned to see the cowboy again, the man whose courage had saved him when all hope seemed lost. One evening, as the sun dipped low over a wide desert plain, the young man stopped to rest near a small rise. The sky was painted with gold and crimson, and the wind moved softly across the sand, carrying a quiet stillness that made the heart feel both heavy and alive. He looked out across the landscape, scanning the horizon, as if hoping to see a figure appear, someone familiar yet distant, someone from a past that had never left him. In that quiet moment, he felt a strange mixture of anticipation and fear.
He did not know if the cowboy was still alive, or even if he would recognize him. But hope, no matter how fragile, had a way of keeping him moving forward.
Meanwhile, the cowboy was traveling through the same lands, following a trail that would eventually lead him toward the settlement where the young man had once been cared for. He did not know it yet, but destiny was guiding them closer. Desert seemed quieter than usual, the wind softer, the sun lower in the sky, as if the land itself were preparing for something important. The cowboy felt a sense of unease, a feeling that something from the past was waiting to be faced. He could not explain it, yet his instinct told him that this journey, like many before, would be different. The young man continued on his own path, moving with purpose but cautious as always. Years of survival had taught him that the world was full of hidden dangers. He walked with careful steps, his eyes scanning every shadow, his ears listening to every sound. The memory of the cowboy was never far from his mind. He remembered the way the man had carried him, had tended to his wounds, and had shown him kindness when the world had offered none. That memory gave him courage, but it also left a hole. A longing to see the man again and to thank him for changing his life. As the sun began to set, the two men unknowingly moved closer to the same small settlement. The young man paused at the edge of a dry creek, crouching to take a sip of water. The cowboy, riding slowly along a nearby ridge, noticed the movement below. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. Something about the figure on the creek bank felt familiar, though he could not place it.
His heart beat faster, a mix of excitement and caution, as if some long-forgotten memory were stirring to life.
The young man straightened, sensing a presence on the ridge above. He turned his head, and for the first time, their eyes met. There was a moment, a brief, silent pause, where the world seemed to hold its breath. The cowboy stared at the young man, and recognition flickered in his eyes. The boy he had saved all those years ago had grown into a man before him, strong, confident,
it carrying the same quiet intensity that had drawn him in long ago. "Do you remember me?" the young man asked softly, his voice carrying across the distance. The words were simple, but they held a weight that neither man could ignore. The cowboy's chest tightened. He had hoped for this moment in some corner of his heart, but now that it had come, he felt a mixture of relief, fear, and wonder. He dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving the man before him. I think I do," the cowboy replied, his voice low but steady. He walked toward the young man, each step measured, as if approaching a memory he had long carried but never fully understood. The young man waited, watching him closely, noting the lines on his face, the gray in his hair, and the careful way he moved. It was him, the man who had saved him. And yet, years of separation had created distance, both physical and emotional, that neither could ignore. As they drew closer, silence settled between them. Words seemed unnecessary at first. The young man studied the cowboy's face, seeing both the strength and the weariness, the courage and the quiet loneliness. The cowboy looked at the young man and saw not just the boy he had saved, but the man he had become, resilient, strong, and full of a life shaped by survival and memory. Their eyes met, and in that gaze they shared more than words could ever convey.
"Finally," the cowboy spoke again, breaking the silence. "I never thought I'd see you again," he said.
His voice carried a mixture of relief and disbelief, as if he were speaking not just to the man, but to a part of himself that had waited all these years. The young man nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I wondered if you made it," the cowboy continued, his eyes softening. "I hoped, but I didn't know." The young man's voice was quiet but steady. "I survived because of you. I never forgot what you did for me. Not a day passed that I didn't think of you." Pause as he looked at the cowboy, his eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper, a longing that had been buried under years of survival and struggle.
"I had to find you," he added. "I had to see if you were still out here, living, breathing, still the man who saved me."
The cowboy felt a lump in his throat. He had carried memories of the boy for so long, wondering if his choice had made a difference. And now here was the proof. Not just that he had saved a life, but that his actions had shaped another human being, had given someone the courage to survive, to grow, and to carry forward the lessons of kindness and bravery. Pressed on him, but it was not heavy. It was full of meaning and quiet joy. For a while they stood silently, letting the wind carry their thoughts, letting the desert witness their reunion. The young man stepped closer. The cowboy mirrored him, and finally there was a small, cautious smile exchanged between them, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed all those years ago. The years of separation, of uncertainty, of longing fell away in that moment, leaving only the truth of their shared history and the recognition of each other's courage and heart. "I never knew your name," the cowboy admitted finally. "I never asked. I just knew you needed help." The young man smiled, a small, knowing smile. "It doesn't matter now," he said. "You were enough. That was all that mattered. That moment, it changed my life." The cowboy nodded slowly, understanding fully. One choice, one act of bravery, had created a bridge across time and distance, connecting two lives in ways neither could have predicted. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, they began to talk more openly. The young man shared stories of survival, of the struggles he had faced, of the lessons he had learned. The cowboy listened, amazed at the strength the boy had developed, at the wisdom and courage he now carried. In turn, the cowboy shared memories of his own life, the choices he had made, the loneliness he had felt, and the quiet hope that had always lingered in his heart.
There was no anger, no bitterness, only understanding.
They realized that life had moved them apart to prepare them for this meeting, to allow them to bring their experiences and strength to each other. Harsh and unforgiving had tested them both, but it had also preserved their bond, keeping it alive in memory and hope until they could finally meet again. Night fell, and they found a place to rest near a small campsite. A fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows across their faces. They shared food, water, and stories, and slowly the tension began to ease. The young man no longer felt fear. The cowboy no longer felt uncertainty. In each other's presence they found a sense of home, of belonging, and of quiet peace that neither had experienced in years. By the time the stars filled the sky, both men knew that this was more than a reunion. It was a turning point. The cowboy had given life, courage, and hope to the boy he had saved. And the young man had returned, not just to express gratitude, but to honor the legacy of that moment, to show that one act of kindness could ripple across time and shape a life. As they sat together under the stars, the wind whispering through the desert, both men felt the weight of the past lift slightly. There were still challenges ahead, stories to tell, and truths to face, but for the first time in years, they felt the power of connection, of shared history, and of human courage. The desert had been harsh. Life had been difficult. But in this quiet night, under the vast sky, they found what they had been searching for: understanding, closure, and the beginning of a new chapter together. The fire crackled softly in the quiet night, sending small sparks into the desert sky. The cowboy and the young man, once a boy, sat close to it, their faces illuminated by the warm glow. The silence between them was not awkward, it was filled with unspoken understanding. They had waited years for this moment, and now that it had come, they both felt the weight of what had been lost and what could finally be shared. The young man took a deep breath, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "There is so much I want to tell you," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Oh, not just about what happened after you saved me, but about who I became because of that moment." He paused, searching the cowboy's eyes. "I survived because of you." But surviving was not easy. Life was hard. I had to learn everything from scratch. "Bunnis, I never doubted you would make it," he said quietly. "But I wondered, Dessa. I hoped, but I never knew. But—" There was a long pause as he thought about the years that had passed, the memories he had carried, and the silence that had stretched between them. "I wish I could have done more for you back then," he added, his voice heavy with regret. The young man shook his head gently. "You did enough. You saved me. That was more than anyone else could have done." And it wasn't just about survival, it was about hope. That hope carried me through every struggle, every day of loneliness, every moment when the world seemed against me. His voice grew softer, almost a whisper. "You gave me a life, and for that, I can never thank you enough." The cowboy looked down at the fire, letting the words sink in. He had never considered that a single act of kindness could shape someone's entire life. He had done what any person with a conscience would have done, yet hearing it now, so many years later, brought a weight of realization he had not expected.
"I didn't know," he admitted.
"I didn't know it mattered that much. I just did what I thought was right."
"It mattered,"
the young man said firmly. "More than you will ever know. Because of you, I learned that people are capable of goodness, even when life is cruel. Because of you, I found the courage to survive, to grow, to face the world with strength instead of fear.
I never forgot you.
He looked at the cowboy with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, a longing that had been buried for years but now surfaced in the quiet of the night. The cowboy's voice was low, almost a whisper.
I never asked your name back then. I should have.
But I remember everything else. Your face, your fear, the moment I carried you through the desert. Dies. That day has never left me. He paused, shaking his head slightly. I thought about you almost every day. I wondered if you were alive, if you had found safety, if you had
become someone strong. The young man smiled faintly.
I did become strong, he said. But strength alone is not enough.
You taught me about trust, about courage, about compassion. I had to carry those lessons with me because the world doesn't give them freely. He leaned closer to the fire, his eyes reflecting both the flames and the weight of memory.
I want you to know that your choice didn't just save my life, it shaped it. For a long while, they simply sat together, letting the fire and the night hold them in silence.
Then the cowboy spoke again, his voice tinged with curiosity and a hint of fear. Tell me about your life.
After the desert, after the healer, what happened to you?
The young man nodded.
It was not easy.
I had to move from place to place to survive in a world that didn't always welcome me. People judged me for being different, for being who I am. I faced danger, hunger, and loneliness. But I also learned, every day, to be careful, to be brave, and to keep moving forward. Paused, letting the weight of those years settle between them. I thought about you often. I wondered if you were out there somewhere, still riding, still helping people.
I hoped you were safe.
The cowboy listened quietly, absorbing every word. He realized that the boy he had saved had not only survived, but had grown into a man of strength, courage, and wisdom. He had faced the harshness of the world and had carried the lessons of kindness forward, shaping himself into someone capable of understanding, forgiveness, and hope. The cowboy felt a mixture of pride and humility. He had not known the full impact of his actions, yet here it was, laid bare before him.
I wish I could have helped more, the cowboy said again, his voice rough with emotion. I never knew what became of you. I wondered if my choice mattered at all.
It mattered more than you can imagine, the young man replied.
Your courage gave me the chance to grow, to learn, to face challenges I never could have faced alone. You taught me that even in a world that seems cruel, one person's choice can make all the difference.
They spoke late into the night, sharing stories of survival, struggle, and growth. The young man told the cowboy about the people he had met, the dangers he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. He spoke of the healer who had cared for him, of the moments of fear and despair, and of the quiet victories that had kept him alive. The cowboy shared his own stories as well, of his travels, his work, his moments of loneliness, and the choices he had made along the way.
Back. As the hours passed, they discovered something profound. Though separated by years and distance, their lives had been connected in ways they could not have imagined.
The cowboy's act of courage had created ripples that shaped not just the young man's life, but the man he had become. And the young man's return, his courage to seek out the cowboy, had created a new chapter in the cowboy's life. One filled with understanding, closure, and the possibility of healing old wounds. The young man's voice grew softer, more introspective.
There were times when I felt anger, he admitted. Anger at the world, at the people who hurt us, at the loneliness that followed me.
But I always remembered you. And remembering you reminded me that not everyone is cruel, that not everyone will abandon you, that sometimes someone can choose kindness when it matters most.
The cowboy nodded. I never knew how much that mattered, he said.
I thought I was just doing what anyone should do. But hearing this, it changes how I see everything.
I see that even small choices can leave lasting marks, that courage and kindness are never wasted.
They continued to speak until the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn.
The desert, vast and quiet, seemed to listen to their words, as if holding their stories in its sands. Both men felt a sense of peace that had eluded them for years. They had faced the past, shared the truth, and finally acknowledged the impact they had on each other's lives. It was not just a reunion, it was a reconciliation, a moment of understanding that allowed them to move forward without the weight of unspoken regrets or unanswered questions. The young man looked at the cowboy with a mixture of gratitude and hope. "Came back to find you," he said. "Not to repay you, not for anything material, but to show you that your courage mattered, that it shaped a life."
And to tell you that I am grateful, more than words can say.
The cowboy placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "And I am grateful that you came back," he replied, "because now I see that one choice, one act of courage can carry through a lifetime. And now we have a chance to face the future together, to carry forward what we've learned, to honor the past without being trapped by it."
In that quiet desert morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in gold and orange, both men understood that their stories were no longer separate. They had shared a bond forged in courage, shaped by struggle, and strengthened by memory.
Past, with all its pain and uncertainty, had brought them here. And now, together, they could move forward with clarity, strength, and hope.
There were still questions to answer, challenges to face, and paths to choose. But for the first time in years, both men felt the freedom that comes from truth.
They had faced the shadows of the past, spoken their hearts, and acknowledged the impact they had on each other's lives. Desperation. The young man had returned not just to honor a debt of gratitude, but to show that courage, kindness, and compassion could endure, even through the harshest deserts and the longest years. As the sun rose higher, warming the desert's sand, they rose as well. Their shadows stretched long across the ground, two figures moving forward together. They had faced the past and found understanding. They had shared the truths that had been buried under years of separation. And now they would step into the next chapter of their lives, carrying the lessons of courage, compassion, and hope with them. For the cowboy and the young man, the desert no longer felt empty. It held memories, lessons, and the quiet certainty that even the smallest act of kindness could echo across a lifetime. They had faced the past together and found not only closure but the strength to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. The morning sun warmed the desert, painting the sand and rocks with gold and soft shadows. The cowboy and the young man walked side by side, their figures moving together through the quiet land. There was a calm in the air, a sense that the desert itself had witnessed their reunion and the truths they had shared. Both men felt the weight of years lifting from their shoulders. They had faced the past, confronted their fears, and shared the stories that had shaped them. Now, the question remained: what would they do with the future? The young man spoke first, his voice quiet but firm. "I've spent so many years wondering if I would ever see you again. I didn't know what would happen if I did. I feared disappointment, rejection, or that you wouldn't remember me at all. But here we are." He paused, letting his words hang in the warm desert air. "Now I realize that it doesn't matter what the world thinks or what the past holds.
What matters is what we choose to do now." The cowboy nodded slowly.
"You're right," he said. "The past is behind us. We cannot change what has happened, but we can choose how to move forward."
I've spent years alone, wondering if the choices I made mattered.
Now I see that they did, more than I could have imagined. He looked at the young man, seeing the strength, wisdom, and hope that had grown from the seeds of that long-ago act of kindness. And now, I see that there is still life to live, still a chance to make a difference. For the first time in years, the young man felt a sense of peace that had eluded him through his struggles, tested him, shaped him, and at times tried to break him. But it had also preserved the memory of the cowboy, giving him the strength to survive and the courage to seek out the man who had changed his life. And now, standing here together, he understood that life was not just about survival. It was about connection, about choices, and about honoring the acts of courage that shape us all.
They reached the edge of a small settlement, the same one where the young man had once been cared for as a boy.
The memories of that time returned vividly. The healer who had tended his wounds, the nights of fear and loneliness, and the quiet hope that had kept him moving forward. He remembered the cowboy who had carried him through the desert, who had shown him that one person could make a difference. And now, walking alongside him, he realized that the story had come full circle. The cowboy paused near the settlement, taking a deep breath. "This place, it hasn't changed much," he said softly, "but it feels different now. Back then, I had no idea what would happen to you. And now it feels like the world has given us a chance to finish what we started." The young man nodded, his eyes scanning the familiar sights. "It's strange," he said. "I have memories of this place, memories of fear and struggle. But I also have memories of hope, of courage, and of kindness. And now, with you here, those memories feel complete. I don't have to carry them alone anymore." They spent the day walking through the settlement, reconnecting with the land and the people who had shaped the young man's early years. He introduced the cowboy to those who had helped him, sharing stories of survival, courage, and the long journey that had brought him here. The cowboy listened, learning about the life the young man had built, the challenges he had faced, and the ways he had grown stronger because of the lessons they had both learned. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of red and gold, the two men found a quiet spot on a small hill overlooking the settlement. They sat together, watching the lights flicker in the distance, feeling the warmth of the day give way to the cool of evening. The young man spoke again, his voice calm but full of conviction. "I've realized something," he said. "Life is not just about surviving. It's about what we do with the lives we are given, about how we choose to act, and about the people we touch along the way." The cowboy looked at him, understanding perfectly. "You've carried that lesson with you," he said. "And now I can see it in you. You've lived a life of courage and kindness, even when the world was harsh." "That is more than I could have hoped for, and now I see that our stories are not separate anymore. They are connected, and they will guide us forward." There was a quiet moment as both men reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The desert, once a place of danger and uncertainty, now felt like a witness to their courage, their resilience, and the bond that had endured across time and distance. The young man reached out, placing a hand on the cowboy's shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saving me, for giving me hope, and for showing me that even in the darkest moments, there is light." The cowboy smiled faintly, feeling a sense of fulfillment he had not known in years. "And thank you," he replied, "for coming back, for showing me that what we do matters, and for reminding me that courage and kindness can echo across a lifetime."
He paused, letting the words settle.
It seems we both have lessons to carry forward, and now we can do it together. As night fell over the desert, the two men stood and looked up at the sky, stars scattered across the blackness like diamonds. The wind moved softly, carrying the quiet sounds of life in the distance. Both men felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the past had been confronted and that the future held possibility. They understood that life would continue to challenge them,
But they also knew that they could face those challenges together, strengthened by the bond that had been forged years ago in the harsh desert sun.
The young man spoke once more, his voice carrying hope and determination. We cannot change the past, but we can shape the future.
And now we have a choice. We can carry forward what we've learned, honor those who helped us, and live with courage and kindness. The cowboy nodded, feeling the truth in his words. We can, he agreed. Petuer. And we will, because now we are not alone anymore. They spent the next few days preparing to move on from the settlement, taking only what they needed for the journey ahead. The young man shared stories of his travels and the people he had met, while the cowboy reflected on his own experiences and the wisdom he had gained over the years. Together, they began to plan their next steps, not just as individuals, but as two men connected by a past that had shaped them both, and by a future they could now face together. Before leaving, the young man visited the healer who had once cared for him. He introduced the cowboy, explaining the story of how he had been saved many years ago. The healer listened in awe, tears in his eyes, realizing that the simple act of kindness he had witnessed so long ago had grown into a life full of courage, wisdom, and compassion. The cowboy and the young man both felt a deep sense of gratitude for the healer's role in the story, understanding that life's challenges were met with the support and courage of many, not just one. As they left the settlement and moved into the desert once more, the two men felt a sense of freedom and purpose. The past had been honored, the present had been embraced, and the future was theirs to shape. The young man rode beside the cowboy, both men moving forward together, their bond stronger than ever. They knew there would be challenges, obstacles, and uncertainties ahead, but they also knew that they could face anything as long as they had courage, trust, and the lessons of the past to guide them. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of sand, rock, and sky, but it no longer felt lonely or harsh. It felt like a witness to their journey, a keeper of their stories, and a reminder that courage, kindness, and human connection could endure across time and distance. The young man looked at the cowboy, his eyes full of gratitude and determination. "Let's move forward," he said. "Together." The cowboy nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "Together," he agreed. And with that they rode on into the desert, carrying the lessons of their past, the strength of their bond, and the hope of a future shaped by courage, kindness, and the knowledge that one simple act of compassion could change a life forever. The wind moved softly across the sands, the sun dipped low in the sky, and the desert held their story in its vast, unending embrace. And though their journey was far from over, both men knew that the past had been faced, the present had been shared, and the future was theirs to shape. A future of courage, connection, and hope, built on the simple truth that one life saved can ripple across time and touch the heart of another forever.